Aloha everyone and welcome to another Tinkers Academy video. I'm your host Kay Elmer, and in this video I'd like to share with you the research that I've done on the unintended consequences of oral contraceptives for women, otherwise known as birth control. I had a unique interest in this from another video I did. I went down a rabbit hole, and let me tell you, the information that I found is remarkable, fascinating, alarming, amazing. It is just the most interesting thing that I've uncovered in quite a while in terms of just digging into the science behind something, or just asking a simple question, hey, does it affect us? And what the answers that I came back with are just truly amazing. So if this is something that's interesting to you, or if you've are with someone who's on oral contraceptives or have taken them yourselves, you might want to just take a look at this video. So here we go. Now this is going to be really controversial, so I just want to make sure that I put out my disclaimer on this video, that this video is for informational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. The content should not be used to diagnose or treat any health condition. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes to your health regime or starting any new treatment. The creator of this video, me, I'm not responsible for any actions taken based on the information provided. Also, just please understand that to follow is a theoretical analysis of the impact of birth control on natural mate selection processes for humans and its unintended consequences, right? So it's not to be construed as fact. It is my theory, and here is the science to back up my theory. So now, why did I do this video? Well, I just did a video prior to this one called How to Hack Body Odor. And in that video, I went through the science of what what creates body odor and how it really reflects your health, and then how you could then deal with that naturally without chemicals. And so part of the reasoning in that video that I came up with, why that was why body odor is an important factor of health, is because what I learned in that video, or that research, was that our ability to smell is a superpower. When you look at what we are able to do from our five physical senses, with vision, we have a very narrow band of the light spectrum that we can see. So we don't see everything. We see a very narrow bit of it. Same thing with hearing. We only have a very narrow band of all of the different sounds in the universe that we can literally hear and we can tune into. However, when it comes to smell and taste, we have this unlimited ability to interpret the world with this incredible superpower called smell. And so one of the interesting things in that research was that for the longest time, up until about just literally within the last 10 years, it was thought that our ability to smell was very limited to about 10,000 different odors. And that's what all the textbooks say. But in 2017, Rutgers University did a study, and they determined that humans could smell up to 1 trillion different odors, that they could detect that many different odors. And that really kind of just really perked my interest on, okay, now if the universe, created us biologically through evolution, having this incredible sense of smell, then it must be for something important. And that's where this video comes from. So now I do want to get some terminology out of the way before we get into the science. And this is a common phrase I'll be using throughout this video called MHC, and that stands for the major histocompatibility complex. It's an immunologically important group of genes in your genetic genomes that appears to be under natural as well as sexual selection. So in other words, geneticists have identified a portion of your genes in your DNA, right, that control your attractiveness to the opposite sex, and they call that major histocompatibility complex, MHC, and that's in all mammals, but specifically to humans it's called HLA. So you'll hear in this video the two phrases used synonymously. You'll hear MHC and you'll hear HLA, but that's your section of your genes. It's genetic, and that's what's the most interesting part about the science, is that genetics play a huge role in mate selection, or the other people you find attractive. So here we go. Let's get into the science. Now, it started off, well, this whole issue really kind of started off with a landmark study It's been nicknamed the Stinky T-shirt experiment, but the actual name of the study was produced. It was 1995, and the study was titled "Body Odor Preferences in Men and Women, and Do They Aim for MHC combinations or simple heterogynous." Sorry, okay, keep mispronouncing that word. Anyway, so but bottom line is that this Stinky T-shirt experiment in 1995 was done by the Department of Behavioral Ecology from the Zoological Institute in Hinterkappelen, Switzerland. Okay. What they wanted to do in that study was they wanted to determine, does smell, right, affect mate selection, and how, and basically, and how did it affect it in terms of genetics. And so they did this study where they took 121 men and women, and they had them basically smell the odors of 6 T-shirts worn by 2 women and 4 men, right? So the people that wore their T-shirts wore them for 2 days, no cologne, no soap, just their natural scent, no masking. And they packaged up these T-shirts, and then they had people, these men and women, 121 of them, smell, and then rate them on a factor of attractiveness. And so now the scorings of what they refer to as pleasantness correlated negatively with the degree of MHC similarity between smeller and the T-shirt wearer in men and women who were not using contraceptive pills, and then which was side thing that they discovered during the study. I'll explain this. It's the wording is pretty tricky on this one. So in other words, what they did was they had a bunch of people smell other people's T-shirts and rate them on whether or not they were attracted to the person or that smell that they'd smelled on the shirt. Okay, and then they went and they took a look at the 6 people and their genetics. They looked at the 121 and their genetics in terms of MHC, right? And so we all have different genetics in terms of MHC genetic profiling. We're all different, okay? And they discovered, right, that first of all, what was interesting, one of the highlights of the study was that there was no apparent effect of gender. So irregardless of gender, whether it was men smelling the T-shirts for women, right, or women smelling the T-shirts of men, it didn't matter. It was both the same thing, that they were both driven by this attraction, and the attraction was the MHC similarity and dissimilarity. So what that meant was that men and women who were reminded of their own mate and ex-mate when sniffing a T-shirt had significantly fewer MCH or MHC allies or Ellas in common with this T-shirt wearer than expected by chance. So it was mathematically and statistically sound in terms of their results, which suggested that MHC or linked genes influence mate choice. So that was their first question. Does the person's genetics affect your attractiveness to the opposite sex? And the answer was yes. And then they went and looked at, okay, what is it about that? What is it about that? Like, what about that other person's genetics makes you attractive to them? So what they discovered was people who are different than you are the ones you're attracted to naturally. Okay, and if they're the same as you genetically, you're not attracted to them. So it's a little bit backwards, right? So different is good, or different is natural order of things. People are attracted to different people that are different than them, and not attracted to people who are. But what they discovered in this study, when they looked at the women, there's like 49 women in this study, they discovered something really unique. And that while the overall arching group of people who were not taking oral contraceptives, all of the men and half the women, right, they were not taking oral contraceptives. And so they all behaved a certain way. But the ones that were taking contraceptives didn't behave like the rest of the group. They behaved in a way where they were choosing people who were similar to them, which was the opposite of the let's say the control group who were not on contraceptives. So in other words, in pill using women, the correlation between odor pleasantness and the degree of similarity on the MHC MHC tended to be again reversed. So now a little graphic here to kind of help everybody understand this. This is really important to the whole discussion, is that when you look at, and this is what the study proved, okay, or demonstrated. When it comes to natural genetic mate selection in human beings, that the dissimilarity of the genetics, your MHC on your genome, when a woman chooses or a man chooses a partner, they're naturally going to choose someone who's different than them. And then they would produce, in other words, you take two different people with different genetics, you combine them, and you create a third group of genetics in your offspring that are genetically stronger than you. It's evolution, folks, right? This is evolution. You find someone who's dissimilar genetically from you, you basically produce offspring, and your offspring becomes stronger than you two individually to continually, in other words, continue the species. It's all nature here, right? What is the primary purpose of life? And that is to reproduce. And what is the whole point of reproducing? Is you want to continually reproduce stronger and stronger genetics for the sustainability and the survivability of the species. And that's just evolution. That's what they discovered, which was really cool. But then this group of people with no contraceptives, they were all behaving this way. The people who were on contraceptives, primarily half of the women, they discovered that they didn't have that ability, that they were choosing mates that were similar to them, which would then produce offspring that had no genetic basically no genetic, difference between their parents. So they were either the same or they were weaker genetically. Okay, because the whole point of evolution is that we constantly produce stronger and stronger and stronger offspring genetically. But this group of people, this group of women, were selecting mates who were similar to them, and thus producing offspring that were similar to them. And so they weren't carrying on the evolutionary path of creating stronger genetic offspring. And that's what they discovered. Now, I got to tell you, when I was doing all the research, there was a lot of, this came out in 1995, and there were a lot of geneticists and biologists that were just very critical of this study because, they were done by zoologists, right? So they were very critical of it, and so it came under a lot of criticism back then. But since then, there have been other studies that have backed up the demonstrated results of this initial stinky t-shirt study. And so one of those studies was done in 2008 by the University of Newcastle in Newcastle, UK. And the title of this study was MHC correlated odor preferences in humans and the use of oral contraceptives. Now, this group of people at the University of Newcastle decided hey, is this true? I mean, is that really happening? And in their tests, they found a significant preference shift towards MHC similarity associated with pill use, just like the folks in the Netherlands, right? Or Switzerland, I'm sorry. And so, which was not evident in the control group. So now what they concluded was that odor plays a role in human mates choice. So they confirmed that odor, your ability to smell someone's odor, can differentiate their genetics, and it's all happening in your brain. You just don't know it. It's part of our genetics. We just do this naturally. And then their results suggested that contraceptive pill use could disrupt and the mate preferences of people who were choosing, or women who were choosing their mates. So they confirmed what they had found out in Switzerland with this other study in 2008, that they actually saw that happening in their study as well. And there's more studies. In 2009, there's another study. This was a journal article published by the University of Sheffield, and the title was, "Does the Contraceptive Pill Alter Mate Choice in Humans?" So in 2009, a year later, another university did the same study, and basically they looked at everything, and they said in their study that new evidence suggests that the pill, by eliminating the estrus, which is the hormone thing that women who are pregnant go through, and also when they're on their menstrual cycle, when they eliminate those changes, the natural cycling preferences in women for markers of both genetic quality and compatibility in mates, as well as natural cycling attractiveness to men. So in other words, they confirmed that your ability to smell was a very important aspect to being attractive to men, and it was tied to genetics. Now, then they went on and looked at how does oral contraceptives affect women's natural mate selection process. And whereas normally cycling women express a preference for MHC dissimilarity, right, as the natural order of things, you want to have someone who's different than you, dissimilar. they discovered in their study in 2009 that the pill users preferred odors of MHC similar men, indicating that pill use might eliminate adaptive preferences for genetic dissimilarity. So again, this study by the University of Sheffield confirmed the stinky t-shirt experiment that said, yeah, if you take oral contraceptives, you women turn off your natural ability to detect the similarity or dissimilarity in genetics of a potential partner. And then again, in 2016, one more study came out. And this was actually a journal article in Scientific Reports titled Influence of HLA on Human Partnerships and Sexual Satisfaction, conducted by the University of Dresden in Dresden, Germany. They basically stated in their paper, in their study, that they had basically gone through the literature and they had confirmed that fish and birds and mammals prefer mates with different genetic MHC code compared to their own. So this was not just humans, but it was also all these other studies out there confirmed that all life on the planet, that's, animals, not plants, but all this life that's mating, they're always programmed to always go after somebody or something, your mate, that's different than you genetically to produce stronger genetic offspring. So this preference in their study, what they stated in their study was this preference increases the chances of high MHC variety in the offspring. And then this is an interesting aspect is, okay, now why do we do that? Why are we biologically wired to do that? And they kind of discovered that it's leading to enhanced resilience against a variety of pathogens. So there's another clue here. So not only are we wired to select dissimilar genetics in mates to produce stronger genetic offspring, but that stronger genetic offspring has an advantage, right, over non-stronger genetic offspring in the ability to have a resilience against pathogens. In other words, survival of the species, guys. We constantly, if you follow the natural order of things, we produce stronger genetic children who then are going to be stronger, against pathogens and be healthier. And that's just part of it, which they tied in the pathogens aspect. So then their study was, we show on a large scale, they had all this math in there, that HLA dissimilarity correlates with partnership. They did, so they confirmed it, right? That it does, that dissimilarity, right? Being different correlates with partnership, sexuality, and enhances the desire to procreate. We conclude that HLA, which is also MHC, mediates mate behavior in humans. So there we go. We got 4 different studies that all confirm that human beings and all life on the planet are genetically wired to seek out dissimilar genetics in mates in order to then go and produce stronger genetic offspring. So now, and then the other thing that they all confirmed was that oral contraceptives, the unintended consequence of oral contraceptives, turn that ability off. So then what would happen is that all the women taking oral contraceptives had a high chance of choosing the wrong mate from a genetic standpoint. So now, so what do you do with this information? Well, I took a look at, okay, is that true? I mean, they've got these studies, they looked at all of this stuff genetically, and then so what would be the other unintended consequences, right? So the very first thing that I wanted to do was I asked questions within my own research. I posed some questions and then went and found what the potential answers for those questions were. The first one was, okay, well, when did oral contraceptives get introduced into the human population? So according to the AMA Journal of Ethics, an article in Viewpoint published in June of 2020, it was called The History of Oral Contraceptives. The Food and Drug Administration approved the first oral contraceptive in 1960. So 64 years ago, this is when they started, basically making the birth control pill available to women. And as of 2020, more than 300 million women worldwide have used the pill. So that's our starting point. So to go down this rabbit hole, and you're saying, well, if all of this is true based on the science studies, then what has been the unintended consequences of affecting women's ability to do natural mate selection from a genetic standpoint? So what would be the first thing that would possibly happen? Well, the way I was looking at it, one of the first things that would happen is that if you were a woman and you're on oral contraceptives and you're basically your ability to choose the correct mate for you genetically, naturally, then you might end up, basically being attractive to a different person than you're supposed to genetically. And then how would that affect you? And how would that affect these relationships when, people basically hook up, they get married, they have some kids. And now when they have the kids, what happens? The women stop taking their oral contraceptives, right? So now they usually have one or two, three kids in a row. So when people get married, start having kids, the woman goes off the oral contraceptive, right? This is all, I'm just generalizing. And within 3 to 5 years, she's been off of it long enough, and then she's with a partner who, if she selected someone who was similar MHC profile genetics, her body, her genetics, her subconscious would be telling her this is not the right mate. I chose, because she would then not be in other words, you turn that thing back on, you're going to realize from a genetic standpoint, through your sense of smell, that all of a sudden this is not the right mate, and you're going to go want to look for the right one. That's just what we're programmed to do. Okay, so now would that be so? If that's an assumption and that's a theory of mine, then let's take a look at the divorce rates. Is it true that since oral contraceptives have been introduced in the to human beings, has there been an effect on relationships? So taking a look at a study called Divorce More Than a Century of Change from 1900 to 2018, done by Bowling Green State University, the study was published in 2020. They indeed have been measuring divorce rates since 1900. They determined that there's been almost 4 times as many women experienced a divorce in 2018 compared to 1900. Okay, and that the peak divorce rate occurred in 1980, but it's starting to come down. So the interesting part about this is when you draw this graph out and you take a look at 1960, the introduction of oral contraceptive, look at the spike. And I'll just let you conclude what you want to conclude. But if we see this slow, steady rise because of whatever, modernism and feminism and all that stuff, when you look at, divorce rates. But what's interesting was that if you were to look at this line, it should, if it's just increasing, it would go this direction. But instead, the moment that oral contraceptives were introduced into the population, there's this huge spike of divorces following in the 20 years following. And then it's slowly starting to come back down. So there's one indication, and I'm just saying this is a data point. It's not conclusive, but it certainly is very suspect that this might be yet another unintended consequences of oral contraceptives forcing or causing women to, choose the wrong genetic mate for themselves. So then when you take a look at, who's driving these divorces? Is it the men or the women? Well, that's a very good question, because in an article called a chapter in a book called Social Networks in the Life Course, published in March of 2018, there's a chapter called Who Wants the Breakup? And it basically discusses gender and breakup in heterosexual couples. It's on pages 221 through 243. Now, in this study that was done by a gentleman called Michael Rosenfeld, he looked at 2,262 adults, ages 19 to 94, opposite sex partners, and they started studying it in 2009. By 2015, 6 years later, 371 of these people had broken up or gotten divorced. Okay, so then when he studied who initiated those divorces, this is where his study concluded that Rosenfeld found that women initiated 69% of all divorces compared to 31% for men. So what's the difference? Women are more likely to be on oral contraceptives than men. And this is where, if you look at any of the research, you'll always hear this number that says, oh, women initiate, 70% of the time women initiate divorce. Well, this is the study that everybody got that number from. So then when you say, okay, well, could this be a trend driven by women? And the answer is yeah. The 69% of divorces are initiated by women, according to this study, and this is the trend line for divorces. So, and it all really kind of just kicks off right after oral contraceptives were introduced into the human population. So it's quite interesting. Another data point for consideration. So now, what else could be possible that unintended consequence from oral contraceptives as it relates to genetic mate selection? Well, there's a study for that too. In a study called HLA Associations and HLA Sharing and Reoccurrent Miscarriage, published in 2015, done by Leiden University Medical Center in Leiden, the Netherlands. Now, the aim of this study was a study of studies, right? So they studied 41, different studies on this subject. Okay, on the factor of miscarriages, specifically recurrent miscarriages. So now the aim of this meta-analysis study was to evaluate whether specific maternal HLA-LS and HLA sharing of couples, right, so are associated with the occurrence of recurrent miscarriages. Now, what that means was they looked at similarities genetically, dissimilarities genetically, and what was the miscarriage rates between the two groups. And they defined that recurrent miscarriages, or RM, was defined as 3 or more consecutive unexplained miscarriages, and a control group was included of women with at least 1 live birth and no miscarriages in their history. So that was the population of women that they looked at. So 3 or more consecutive unexplained miscarriages. And was it the women who were dissimilar, which was normal, natural, or similar, which was that the effect of the oral contraceptive? And their results was that the meta-analysis showed an increased risk of recurrent miscarriages in mothers carrying an HLA, DRB1, which was dissimilar, similarities. In other words, this study found that women who had mated with similar genetic partners had an increase in miscarriages over those who had chosen dissimilar mates. And I do want to point out too, this was very important in the study, that they found of the 41, they found a selection bias in 40 studies out of the 41, and they concluded that there was an information bias. But if you read as many studies as I do, you'll find that that's true of almost every study out there. The key point, or the key takeaway, and all of these are just studies. One study does not define the answer to any question, but it's just a data point. It's one more thing to go, maybe that's part of it, right? But they did find that there was an increase. So I went looking for historical, and the closest I could find was a study, or basically a study of miscarriages through the years, right? And so now this one started from, this was a study on miscarriage rate estimates, vital statistics reports for 1976 through 2004. So at least it covered, a good, 30 years, right? And so it started after oral contraceptives were introduced, so we don't know what was happening before that because there's just not enough data. And then one of the parts of this research was a determination that not all, and this was measured off hospitalizations for miscarriages. So, it doesn't include all the miscarriages that hospitals never find out. So they only looked at hospitalized miscarriages and the rates of those. But if you take a look at the graph, you can see since 1976 all the way through 2004, I just drew a linear algorithm, line here in the chart to show you that from a growth standpoint, even though there's fluctuations in miscarriage rates, in the population, there's fluctuations, they go up and down, but the overall trend is up, specifically up for pregnancies that are under 7 weeks, not as pronounced in pregnancies that are, 8 to 12 weeks and or 13 to 22 weeks. But the idea here in the evidence quite shows clearly that there is an increase in miscarriage rates over the time period that we're looking at from 1960 till now, 64 years. And that it does coincide and collaborate with the study done by the Leiden University in terms of the increase in miscarriages, specifically to women, for women who have chosen similar MHC partners, the wrong genetics. So that was an amazing aspect. So another question I ask is, well, what about the children? What about the children that are birthed? Is there any evidence that shows that by choosing similar genetics, i.e. not producing stronger genetic offspring, does that affect the children themselves, the one that actually get, birthed? And so now the Reichman University in Herzliya, Israel published a study in 2016 called Can Contraceptive Pill Affect Future Offspring's Health and the Implications of Using Hormonal Birth Control for Human Evolution. Now, this was a journal article published in Springer Link 2016. They concluded in their study at the Reichman University, and they stated, we compared the health of children born to parents who met while the mother was on the pill with that of children whose parents met when the mother was not on the pill. Results confirmed our predictions, indicating that children to mothers who are on the pill are more infection prone, require more medical care, suffer from a higher frequency of common sicknesses, and are perceived as generally less healthy than children whose parents met on non-pill circumstances. So this was very controversial. It's flat out anti-big pharma, which is rare. You know, it's hard to find studies that are so blatantly out there saying, hey, this is not a good thing, guys. And so it does actually confirm that there is some issue, another data point. This is all about connecting the dots, but here is yet another data point that says when you go against the natural order of things and you introduce something into that blocks our normal, natural way of doing things, living our lives, specifically mate selection, the most important decision you can make in your entire life is choosing the right mate, and you all know what that means, okay? Not only could you have an increase in divorce rates, relationships don't work out when the women finally come off the oral contraceptive. You also have the issue of miscarriage rates are increased, and then now the children that are the offspring have a distinct issue that kids that genetically stronger children don't. So again, taking a look at the historical aspect of this, I was able to find a graph that measured this graph from the Annals of Asthma, Allergies, and Immunology, published in 2022. And the study was risk of allergic diseases from 1870 to 2020. So this one goes way back, okay? And the interesting thing about this study was that they denote that there's a very specific aspect to the study was when a particular allergy is basically discovered, and they start studying it when it's been discovered. So that's kind of where everything kind of baselines at zero, because that's when it's been discovered, and then they track it from there. So the earliest one was pre-hygiene in 1860. So starting about 1873 was the very first allergy that was discovered, and they started tracking the occurrences of that in the human population. And so from 1873, you can see this steady rise in the a number of people that are have hay fever. Then you look at ragweed. And then they started getting into pediatric asthma, and so eosinophilic. I don't even know what that is. Alpha gal first reported in peanut allergies. All right, so here we go. I drew a dot. This is 1960, the introduction of oral contraceptives. And let's take a look at the graph. What does the graph show? Has there been an increase in allergies in children in the human population since the introduction of oral contraceptives? And the data you're looking at says yes. And just anecdotally, right? I mean, when you were a kid, and all of you out there, you're anywhere from 20 to 60, 70, 80 years old. I mean, honestly, when I was a child, there was no such thing as getting flyers you have to take home to your parents that says, we have somebody in the school that's allergic to peanuts, don't bring peanuts to school. When I was a parent and my daughter, I would get flyers that says everything from, please refrain from bringing chocolates because of this kid, please refrain, and he kept getting, and then over and over time, as time goes by, all of a sudden every menu in every restaurant, you know what I'm saying, right? Has we have allergy warnings and gluten free, and I mean all of a sudden it's like it's this explosion of the number of people who have all these different allergies that I never ever even heard about 40, 50 years ago, and then so you look and here's the science behind that, and the answer is there an increase in the number of people who are having all sorts of problems, health problems, since the introduction of oral contraceptives? And the answer is yeah, it really is. There's a lot of people out there with a lot more immunology problems than there ever were before in the history of humans, in terms of just all these problems. Everywhere you go, someone's allergic to something, where that just wasn't the case 50 years ago. So one other thing I want to share with you is, is there yet another unintended consequence? Have I made my point? Well, yeah, there's actually one more I wanted to share with you that popped out in the research, and this is an unintended consequence for the women who are taking oral contraceptives. And this itself is by the National Cancer Institute in an article written in 2018 called Oral Contraceptives and Cancer Risk. Now, this is the government itself, right, or the government body itself, where they basically took a look at all of the studies on oral contraceptives and cancer, and they did a study based on, it was a population-based case control study where they did observational studies, but they said they cannot definitively establish that an exposure, in this case, oral contraceptives causes or prevents cancer. That's their disclaimer. But then they go, overall, however, these studies, this is another study of studies from the National Cancer Institute, 2018, they published, and it's still out there on their website, these studies have provided consistent evidence that the risks of breast and cervical cancers are increased in women who use oral contraceptives, whereas the risk of endometrial, ovarian, and colorectal cancers are reduced. So, good and bad, but just the fact that they're increased. So there's, and okay, everybody, how many people did you know had breast cancer when you were a teenager as opposed to now? Is that been going up as well? I didn't go looking for a graph on that one. That's just sort of anecdotal. I think it is yet another data point in this theory and in this debate that is it possible that oral contraceptives is a really, really bad idea for us as a species. So, one other thing, let's talk about it before I wrap this up for you, is that in the discussion section of this theorem that I'm putting out on the internet here, is, one of the things that I did check, which was I checked with my favorite AI, which is the best one out there right now. It's rated the highest, best one, called the Claude AI. And I just basically asked it, hey, go look at a bunch of studies about oral contraceptives altering female mate selection. And what do you find? Summarize it for me. And so the interesting thing was my question was, do oral contraceptives may alter female mate selection? And so now the AI did all this work for me, and I just wanted to share it with you. And it said, yeah, based on all these different studies that it has access to, which is pretty much all the studies, right? That menstrual cycle variation, that the pill may disrupt the variation in mate preferences that occurs throughout a woman's menstrual cycle, that attractiveness to men, that the pill may impact a woman's attractiveness to men, competition with other women, the pill may impact a woman's ability to compete with other women for mates, preferences for less masculine male. Women who take the pill may prefer less masculine men and may be more likely to choose men with less masculine faces as partners. And then lastly, odor preferences popped out, which is this entire video is about, where women who take the pill may shift their preference towards men with similar MHC odors, which I've been talking about for an hour now. So I have only touched on one attribute of oral contraceptives impact to female mate selection, but I wanted to point out, and the point of this slide is that there are others as well, and that odor, the ability for us to detect through smell the correct mate for us genetically, is one of many different things that are happening because women are taking oral contraceptives. So the last thing I want to do to wrap this up is, hey, you know what? Are oral contraceptives impacting the natural selection process? And the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, I'm stating that. That's my theorem. From everything I've read, through all of the science studies I've seen, yes, it absolutely is affecting it, undoubtedly. And then, but what are the unintended consequences? To summarize one more time, well, the unintended consequences are, that, hey, oral contraceptives increase cancer risk, clearly. Oral contraceptives will block you women, your ability to select the correct genetic mate for yourself and produce weaker genetic offspring. Okay, the consequences of that are increases in miscarriage rates, right? And also increase, obviously, the offspring are a key aspect of that. So miscarriages and birth, or health problems, divorce rates, cancer, it doesn't look good. And then the other thing I do want to, put out there, and again, this is, this type of rabbit hole research is all about connecting the dots. So I really want to stipulate here too, my opinion that, are there other factors at play? Like what else happened, in the 1960s and 50s that could be affecting, since then? It's been 60 years, right? So what other factors are at play here? Well, clearly, the planet Earth has been extremely radiated from all of the nuclear testing that occurred in the 50s and 60s because of Chernobyl, because of Fukushima. The level of radiation on the planet is at an all-time high since we even started measuring it. And that's not even including, and if you include it, non-native EMF. Okay, so now you've got all this, ambient, radiation, the actual gamma rays, and alpha and beta, radiation on the planet. But you've also got EMF radiation as well from all the satellites, the Wi-Fi, the cell phones, all that stuff. So there's this huge level of increase in radiation, and could that have play a role in what we're seeing in terms of genetic offspring, having issues in health and miscarriage and all of that? Yeah, absolutely. I think it's absolutely true. I think that oral contraceptives, when you plug that into the equation, I think it definitely plays a role, and it is definitely not the only cause of all of these problems that we're seeing, down the line since the 1960s. And secondly, too, when you look at the other factors at play, you've got the introduction of just a ton of horribly toxic chemicals into the food supply. You look at there's a ton of pharmaceuticals that are now in the water supply. There's the introduction of microplastics and all of these endocrine blockers that are in the food and water supply that are causing sperm. The sperm counts on men is down 50% over the last 20 years. So is there more factors at play? And the answer is an absolute yes. However, my theorem is that oral contraceptives has a significant role in that unfolding nightmare that our species is facing. And the great news about that is that you can do something about that. Okay, you can definitely do something about that. Not medical advice, just telling you, based on the science, based on the research, based on the trends. Okay, make a decision here. So my last question that I want to share with you, and by the way, if you guys want to comment, I would love to hear what your thoughts are on this. But also, my last question is, does this affect the evolution of our species as human beings? And when I thought about this, I think that we're going to go in three different directions. And I think that when you look at the three directions we're going, is that as natural selection continues, there'll always be people. When you look at 300 million women, there's 9 billion humans on the planet. Half of them are women. So there's 4.5 billion, I'm generalizing, 4.5 billion women, and only 300 million of them are on contraceptives. That's a pretty small number of total women. But what concerns me, that are on oral contraceptives and are affected by this. But what concerns me about that, though, even though it's a small number, 300 million of 4.5 billion, the issue to me is that, access to health care. What group of women on the planet have the access to health care and the money to pay for it? And that's going to be your predominantly resource-rich cultures and societies on the planet. So we're basically taking I would say the more advantageous group of the population of humans on the planet, and we're genetically screwing with them, right? Which I think is going to be more detrimental to the species than if we were to screw with a impoverished group of individuals in some country that no one even knows where it is. And what's the effect of that? And I'm not trying to be disparaging here, but you get where I'm going, right? So I think that there's a huge impact to the evolution of our species, not just, even though 300 million is a low number compared to the total, but it's which 300 million, and it's the ones that are the resource rich individuals that are driving the planet from a technology standpoint and everything else from what resource rich people do. And so that's concerning. So you've got a group of people out there that are basically going to keep, selecting the correct genetic mate for themselves and producing genetic offspring the natural way, survival of the species. And so they're constantly going to be doing genetic strengthening, right? So their offspring are going to be strong. Then their offspring will pick the right mate and have stronger and stronger and stronger, just as nature had designed us to do. And then there's going to be a group of people that produce, let's say they're on oral contraceptives and they produce, then they find someone who's genetically similar to them and they produce a set of offspring that are no better off than their prior generation of genetic. And so their gene pool doesn't get stronger. And so there's a stagnation. And no one knows yet. It's not long enough. It's only 60 years. But what happens when there's this group of humans on the planet that are genetically stagnated, that don't get stronger, that goes against the natural order of the survival of the species? What happens from those guys? Nobody would know. But the one that's most concerning, that we have the most amount of concern about, and we have the data for, that's been shared with you just now, are the ones that are producing genetic weaknesses. When you mate with the wrong person genetically, you produce a genetically weaker offspring. What happens if those genetically weaker offspring go on to themselves, like mothers encouraging daughters to use oral contraceptives and so on and so on? And by the time you get to the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth generation of these genetically weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker offspring, what's going to be happening? And I think we're seeing some of that now. In 60 years, you know how many generations it's happened since then? I'm a product of the 60s. I was born in the 60s. So there's been literally three generations since then. My generation grew up, had kids. My kids have had kids. So there's three generations now. And what happens as each generation goes, and by the way, I have completely been against oral contraceptives for my daughter. Told her not to take it. She 100% agreed with me. This is way before I ever did the research. I just don't trust big pharma. So she has never taken it, never takes vaccines as I do. We just avoid that crap because I just think big pharma is they haven't been around long enough to know what the unintended consequences of the stuff that they do. And that's why I call it an unintended consequence. Did they know that this was going to happen when they came up with this great idea to give women the freedom to be able to just, have intercourse and without the worry of birth, or being pregnant? I mean, that was actually a great thing when it launched, and it's still a great thing, right? I mean, there's a lot of births that don't need to happen, so nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But if you do that, look at what happens. What are the unintended consequences? So, to answer my question for all of you guys for discussion, is that how does this affect the evolution of our species? We're producing genetically weaker offspring who then go on to produce genetic. And then what happens down the road? What happens to genetic stagnation? Because we know what happens with genetic strengthening. The species gets stronger, right? Well, what about those other two groups of people? These other two groups are the future. And hopefully, hopefully it all works out. Nature has a way, right? So anyway, that's my research. That's my theory. I think it does affect it. I think it's very bad. Not medical advice, but I think that it's something you should consider. These are all of the data points. These are all the dots for you to connect in your own opinion, your own mind. I welcome all your comments. That's what this is all about. I just like to do research and I like to share. So thank you for watching this video. Now, every study, all my research for this video, I'm going to just throw it into a folder on OneDrive and put the link below in the video description so that if you want to read the studies yourself or you want to continue this research, you don't have to go hunting around for this stuff. It's right there. So there'll be a link in there for all that research because, DIY research, full transparency, all that stuff. Anyway, so thank you for watching the video. If you find this content interesting, this is kind of what I do. You can always I appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe. It helps support the channel. Also, you want to find out more about me, you can come to the Tinkers Academy, where I've got all my other research projects posted on my blog. And you can just type in tinkers.academy in your URL window. I'll put a link below. Also, too, if you're interested in health and healing, I have a health and healing Telegram chat group that we discuss everything related to health and healing, and this is going to be one of the discussions coming up once I post this video. So again, thank you for your time, everyone. I appreciate it. I know time is precious to you. I hope this was interesting. I hope this was educational. I hope it was informative, and I would absolutely love to hear what your theories are after I have just shared all this research with you. So again, thank you very much. Aloha and have a great day.